Yeah, we are live. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Tech Talks with Santosh. And today we have a very special guest, Siddharth, joining us. So, Siddharth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Sid. I live in Mumbai, in India. I work at Gatsby Inc. So yeah, I help build Gatsby, and I'm super excited to be here. Thank you, Santosh.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining, Sid. So, yep. So today we are going to explore Gatsby. So we will talk about how you can get started with Gatsby, what are the features, and what are the upcoming features, which probably Siddharth knows about. I'm sure he knows about. So we would like to actually hear about it as well as Gatsby Cloud. So in past few months, there has been Gatsby Cloud has been talked a lot due to the features. So we'll be covering that as well. So let's get started. So first, Siddharth, what is Gatsby actually?
Great question. Simply put, Gatsby started out as a static site generator. And among static site generators, what makes Gatsby special is that every time you build a Gatsby site, you're using React, and
Yeah.
your site gets hydrated with JavaScript on the client and then is effectively a React site, right? So you're not just limited to what typical static site generators are limited to. You're still building a client-side React-based SPA, but with all the simplicity and the speed of what static site generators typically offer. That's what Gatsby started out as. Over the years, it's grown to be a lot more than that. Now we have Gatsby Cloud. Gatsby Cloud lets you build your Gatsby sites and also serve them. We have Gatsby hosting. We recently also launched Gatsby Functions, which is in beta right now. Gatsby Functions is a way to write serverless functions in Gatsby. So Gatsby's become a bit of a platform to build your websites, and it's typically the fastest there is right now. If you want to build a website using React, Gatsby is one of the quickest ways to do so.
Okay, that's great. So we'll, of course, we are going to talk a lot, talk more about Gatsby Cloud. So before that, right? So I have a question on Next.js and Gatsby. So what's the difference? Where they stand right now?
Good question. Okay, so to take a step back, right? Next.js started out as a SSR-based framework in Node.js to build out React apps. Gatsby started out as a static site generator. Over the years, we've both borrowed good ideas from each other. Next.js is now doing you can statically generate some pages using SSG and incremental SSG in Next. In Gatsby, we don't have server-side rendering, but we now have Gatsby functions, and we have that sort of line between the two has been blurring, so to speak. I think philosophically, there's also a big difference in the fact that Next is a slightly more lightweight solution in that you bring your own tools, you write your own code to fetch your data, etc. With Gatsby, you get all of that. Gatsby is almost batteries included in that sense. When you're building a Gatsby site, you have a plugin for most popular CMSs. All of those plugins let you fetch data from your CMS very quickly without really writing a lot of code to do that yourself. So they're both great tools. They're both tools to help build websites using React. Gatsby is more batteries included, includes plugins, and you can use GraphQL to fetch your data. Next, on the other hand, is more lightweight. You write your own code. It's slightly thinner layer. That's how I like to see it.
Okay, so you mean the plugin system actually makes Gatsby what it is right now? I mean, it makes it great.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the plugin system is the cool thing about the plugin system is that there's a lot of plugins, and there's a lot of great plugins, both maintained by the community as well as the Gatsby team. We have over 2,000 plugins in Gatsby, to do everything from do adaptive responsive images using Gatsby plugin image, to loading data from WordPress or Sanity or Graph CMS or what have you, any really popular new CMS. And Yeah, I mean, plugins are fantastic because they let you extend the capabilities of what Gatsby is today. And as we move forward, we're gonna, keep seeing new CMSs. We're gonna keep seeing newer tools in the ecosystem, and ideally, we'll keep building plugins that let us, use all of those with the same, same tool, which is Gatsby.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So, in case anyone who wants to start or start using Gatsby, so what are your suggestions to them? Do they need to know about React, or they can just directly start with Gatsby? It would be.
That's a great question. I mean, I think so with Gatsby, it helps if you have React know-how because, like I said, Gatsby is a framework that uses React to render your pages and your views. On the other hand, though, the Gatsby documentation is really written for everyone, right? We try to be as accessible and inclusive as we can. And the documentation doesn't exactly presume prior know-how, so to speak. You can come in without too much knowledge of how React works, but you can learn just the basics of React and GraphQL and get started and get productive. In terms of prerequisites, again, learning a little bit of what React typically looks like, what JSX looks like will help. You can learn it along the way with Gatsby as well. I found Gatsby to be a great learning tool for folks who would like to learn how to build React sites. Again, with GraphQL, just the basic know-how should get you, started fairly quickly. In terms of resources, the Gatsby documentation actually gives you a quick brief on both, So typically, I just point folks to gatsbyjs.com, take a look at the docs. You'll find all the resources you need there, or you'll find at least links to resources that can take you forward.
Let me just share the link here. So this is the link. You can refer to gatsbyjs.com, and you will be able to find everything about Gatsby. In this click on Get Started and just use Gatsby. Yeah. So let's move on. And my next question is again some kind of comparison which I want to actually have. So Gatsby and Netlify. So what's the difference? I've seen Netlify also has Netlify functions. They also, you can also use deploy functions, deploy functionality in Netlify. So they're different.
Well, I mean, to start off with, Netlify and Gatsby are two uniquely different, products, so to speak, right? Like Netlify is a CDN, that lets you deploy sites of any framework and any kind, on edges across the planet. They also have Netlify functions, so on. Gatsby and Gatsby Cloud. I mean, Gatsby is a tool, a static site generator, but Gatsby Cloud is, we have our own, hosting platform powered by Fastly. And we now even have functionality, but all of that is limited to just Gatsby sites, right? So I think the basic difference is, and it's a trade-off, right? Like most things, the basic difference is that on Gatsby Cloud you can only host Gatsby sites. On Netlify you can really host anything, even an HTML file. But the beauty of Gatsby Cloud is that because it's built purely for Gatsby sites. There's things that we can do on Gatsby Cloud that that wouldn't make sense for providers that are meant for really generic use cases. For example, we optimize image generation for Gatsby sites to an extent on Gatsby Cloud, where image generation is distributed. We spin up workers and it's blazing fast. So if you want to build a Gatsby site specifically, Gatsby Cloud is likely going to be the fastest platform there is to do that because it ties into the framework. It's built by the same team that builds the framework. So yeah, that's I think broadly the big difference. In terms of can you host your Gatsby site on Netlify? Absolutely. I mean, Netlify is fantastic. We've all been using it for years, and I think Netlify has been the default go-to place to deploy all your sites, including your Gatsby sites. Right? Gatsby Cloud has only been around for so long. Before Gatsby Cloud existed, we used Netlify as well to host our site. So yeah, in fact, on Gatsby Cloud, you can also point to Netlify as your CDN of choice, and we have direct integrations where you can build the site on Gatsby Cloud, but host it on Netlify. That works too, if you'd like to. I'd still recommend, obviously I'm biased, but I'd recommend hosting on Gatsby hosting itself as well, because often it'll be faster for you. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So next question is more on related to the use cases. So what you would suggest, right? So what is the right choice for actually Gatsby? What kind of applications?
So I think the broad misconception that people tend to have with static site generators is that my site needs to be small and it needs to be a blog or something of that kind to be able to the people typically aren't, at least in the past, people weren't very comfortable looking at building much larger sites with static site generators. Now, the reason I call that a misconception is because A, over the years, things have gotten a lot faster. B, over the years, we've expanded the capabilities of what Gatsby can do, as well as what the build pipeline can offer practically in terms of how long it takes to build sites, right? And today we have sites over, 10,000, 50,000 pages built on Gatsby Cloud and hosted on Gatsby hosting. And these include sites by some really, really, large companies that have massive sites internationalized with like over a dozen languages and so on. So I guess what I'm getting to is that, there really isn't anything Gatsby can't do. If you can build a site and you can think about it, you can probably build it with Gatsby. You get all the advantages of it being static and those assets being just plain assets that you can serve off a CDN, which gives you scalability and gives you speed. But you can also build rich client-side experiences using React, right? Like you do typically with any React site. So I'd flip that question over in terms of, I don't know what use cases there are that you can't build with Gatsby. There are, of course, certain things that you can't build with Gatsby today. Like, for example, if you want to build something that's server-side rendered per request, that's not something Gatsby can do today. And if that, again, there might, you could have your own reasons for why you think you need that for your app. In those cases, Gatsby might not fit for that particular use case. But broadly and generally speaking, we've seen people build all kinds of things with Gatsby, right? People have built really large sites, very image heavy, sourcing data from a variety of different data sources and CMSs. And you can really build anything. I mean, if you hit a roadblock and if you find that there's something that you're having trouble with, we'd be glad to figure out how to unblock you.
That's great. Okay, so let's take one question which is in chat. So Raghavendra has this question. So in what way Gatsby differs from plethora of SSG like Hugo or Jekyll?
That's a great question. I love that question. So like I said, Gatsby started out as a static site generator, and there's plenty of them, right? Like the individual who asked the question said, there's Hugo, there's Jekyll, there's many static site generators, right? I think the primary difference between most of them and Gatsby is that when you build a Gatsby site, you're still building a React site, right? Like once you open the site in your browser and once the JavaScript loads, once your site's hydrated, it is a React site. And now you can do everything you typically can in a React site, right? You can build rich, SPA experiences, you can have client-side routing and so on. And with most static site generators, like Hugo and Jekyll, you don't typically get that out of the box, right? You have some kind of template language and you build HTML for these pages and that's it. That's all they do. With Gatsby, you build all those pages and you still get HTML, you still get static assets, but you also have JavaScript that then hydrates on the client and then, the new site is a React site. So that's, I think, the primary difference. Beyond that, there's a lot of other differences as well, right? With Hugo and Jekyll, again, just the plugin ecosystem, I think with Gatsby is one of our biggest sort of strengths, right? I don't think I've seen any other static site generator with the wealth of plugins that Gatsby has today. We have well-maintained plugins for really any CMS under the hood. Yeah, you can source data from, I've built sites that source data from Shopify for e-commerce, from WordPress for the blogs section, from Drupal for the other pages. You can mix and match and use all of these. And All of these plugins are well maintained. Most of the primary ones are maintained by the Gatsby team. We have over 100 of these plugins in the monorepo. And also the community builds some great plugins as well. So there's this plugin ecosystem. And finally, now, I think with Gatsby Functions, if you'd like to learn more about Gatsby Functions, you can go to gatsbyjs.com/functions. I don't recall if that's the URL, but I mean, you'll find it there you'll find it on the site if you search for it. But Gatsby Functions lets you now write serverless functions in your Gatsby site. It's as simple as creating a file in a directory called source API, and each file then gets deployed as a route. Most static site generators don't give you that out of the box as well. So there's stuff like that. Finally, for the last thing I can think of the top of my head, like I said, with these plugins can do a lot more than just source data. You can have images that are responsive. You can take a large image and during your build generate versions of that image for a variety of different screen sizes, retina, non-retina. So you can really build these AAA quality web experiences with Gatsby, and you get a lot of this stuff for free, with these plugins. So I think that's what that's what differentiates Gatsby really from all the other static site generators that are out there.
So I hope Raghavendra got the question. Sorry, got your answer. Yeah. So let's move on to the next question, and it is more related to the features. So we already spoke about some features, but what you think are actually great features for Gatsby, which you want to highlight?
Great question. I personally, let's think about what I like the most. I think there's about 2 or 3 things that I really, really love about Gatsby. Right, the number one reason why I would build a Gatsby site today is Gatsby plugin image. So Gatsby plugin image is our image plugin, and like I said previously, you can give it a URL, like a URL to an image in your local project, and you can use the image component that it exports, and just out of the box for free, you get images that are responsive, that are, we generate versions for all the way from, your iPad, your phone, all the way to, large ultra-wide displays, retina, non-retina. We even do progressive enhancement where, when you're loading the image, you see a placeholder that is of the color of the primary sort of color of the image, which then blurs into the image. So you get that really fantastic image loading experience, right? Now, we know that images are hard on the web. It's not easy to, build a site with images well, right? Because there's just so many things you have to do. There's jank, there's layout jank, where typically an image will load and it'll re-render and bump out the layout of your entire site. And then there's progressive enhancement, like I mentioned, and then there's, responsive images and so on. All of that stuff that's hard to do, you get for free with Gatsby plugin image. Even stuff like Chrome, a couple of months, I think a little over a year ago, released native lazy loading on Chrome. Gatsby was one of the first frameworks that built that into Gatsby plugin image. And the beauty of it is that if you're on Chrome today, and if your browser supports native lazy loading, Gatsby plugin image will generate image tags with properties, etc., that will just use it out of the box. You don't even need to think about it. It'll just use it. So you get all of that stuff for free. And I think that's great, because every time I've built a site in the past, I've had to think about this stuff and write it and build it myself, right? With Gatsby now, I don't need to worry about this anymore. Now I can move on to more interesting stuff. So that's one. My second favorite feature of Gatsby, I would say, is GraphQL. And I know that it's also one of the scariest parts of Gatsby, right? For folks who haven't used Gatsby before, I've seen a lot of them get intimidated by the idea of GraphQL, because it's yet another DSL, yet another language you have to learn, right? However, I think it's one of our biggest strengths as well. And the reason I say that is because, so let's think about an average, site that you're trying to build. Let's talk about the example that I previously mentioned. Let's say you have a blog on the site, and you have a shop section, right, where you try to sell some merchandise, and then you have some arbitrary other pages. Now, for the shop, you probably want to use Shopify, unless you're building it from scratch, which, why would you? For the blog, maybe you like WordPress, maybe your content editors are used to that experience. Now, typically, if you would like to consume data from all these different platforms, each of them has their own SDK, right?
Yeah.
Or each of them has their own REST API. And now you're stuck with trying to write code that, fetches these different APIs, takes these different shapes, and transforms them, and then you have to look up documentation for every new service you start consuming, and all of that takes a lot of time, right? Like most of the code you write ends up being code that either transforms data or takes one shape, transforms it to another shape, which is transforming data, or which fetches data from somewhere and then has error conditions, when you can't fetch it and so on. Now, with Gatsby, and the reason I mentioned GraphQL is because with Gatsby, if you want to fetch data from any of these different sources, if you use the plugin, if you install the plugin and just set up the options, all of them have just one way of fetching data from, and that's GraphQL, right? Irrespective of the data source, whether that's WordPress or Shopify or Contentful or any other CMS, even a Markdown file, you can consume data from all of that via Gatsby's GraphQL layer. Now, the beauty of GraphQL, in case, for the folks who aren't familiar with it, is that GraphQL has an interactive editor where you can, a playground called Graphql, where you can write GraphQL queries. And because of the nature of how GraphQL functions, because of its, you can introspect a GraphQL server, it gives you autocomplete and documentation out of the box, right? So this solves the second part of what I was describing earlier, which is every time you need to consume a new service, you need to look up their documentation, learn how it works, so on. And that stuff takes a lot of time, right? With Gatsby, you don't have to do that, because the moment you hook up a new source, the moment you have a new plugin, you now have GraphQL autocomplete and documentation that's generated, which you can look at, start playing with on the playground, write queries, and you're done. You don't have to rewrite all of that boilerplate all over again. So that's the second thing I love about Gatsby. I think it really, really simplifies the idea of consuming these different sources, right? Like I remember talking to someone, they wanted to build an app with Instagram, right? They wanted to load some images from Instagram. And often I don't even know off the top of my head if there's a plugin for that or not. But turns out there is a Gatsby plugin in Instagram. You can literally just give it a profile and start querying for posts. And again, you don't need to learn what their API looks like. You can just start writing GraphQL queries and it'll just work, right? So that nature of making access to these different sources homogeneous, or sort of commoditizing access, so to speak, via GraphQL is, I think, one of the most powerful parts of Gatsby. And while it's intimidating because it's a new sort of thing to learn, if you can get through it and pick it up and get through that initial sort of bump, it's super, super great, because everything you then consume with via Gatsby ends up being in GraphQL. So that's the thing I think I like the most after images. And finally, number three, I'll talk about one more, which is functions, right? For the longest time, you build a static site and there's always that one thing that you want to, that one form that you want to submit to and save in some database somewhere, or there's that one form again which you want to submit to and send an email from, right? Or there's just some little server-side code you need to write, right? And often it's so small that you don't really see the point of building out an entire server for it. So you look out for serverless platforms, and right, this is one of the reasons why serverless has gotten so popular, because it's sort of an app. I mean, it's called serverless. It's not really serverless. There's obviously servers under the hood, but the beauty of it is that it abstracts all of that away. So as a developer, you don't need to worry about it anymore. You're just writing code, and it'll magically run on some infra and give you back the response. Now, looking for another serverless platform and trying to install its own CLI and writing code and then deploying it and now maintaining that separate from your Gatsby app has always been a pain. And with Gatsby functions, that doesn't need to be the case anymore. Now with Gatsby functions, just like you create a new page where you can, so in Gatsby, if you want to create a new page, you just need to create a file. There's a directory called source pages. You can create a file in there called hello.js or hello.ts, if you like that and you get a page at hello/hello, right? Similarly, with Gatsby functions, there's now a directory called source API. You can create a new file in it. That file could be, santosh.js or form.ts. And there you have it. You deploy your site on Gatsby Cloud, you'll get an API on /form or /santosh. And it's that easy. You don't need to configure yet another platform. You don't need to, figure out, where that code goes and so on. You can just put it in the same repo and everything will just work. And I think that's super powerful, right? Because that now not only lets you do those forms or those, cool little things that like you want to trickle into your site, but now opens up a variety of new use cases, right? We've seen people having many functions in their Gatsby site. And now you can really build anything. I mean, you could build, you could have a couple of functions that do CRUD on, say, DynamoDB at the back, and a couple of functions that do like really complex, computation based on your business use case. And you don't have to worry about the infra, just like you didn't have to worry about the infra with, Gatsby sites, because everything could go on any CDN. Now with Gatsby functions, you don't need to worry about that infra, because now it'll just run on, it'll run serverlessly on Gatsby Cloud, and really you don't have to worry about any of that. We've also built Gatsby functions in a way in open source where it isn't really limited just to Gatsby Cloud. Like today it is, because I don't think any other platforms let you compile a Gatsby function and serve it. But that's not something that isn't possible. That's not something that we want to limit, right? Gatsby functions is a part of core open source Gatsby. When you build a Gatsby site and it has functions, it gets written into the Gatsby projects.cache directory. It's all available within, if you write a plugin and try to access what functions that are on a site, we have APIs for all of that. So really, you can build a Gatsby plugin, Azure serverless, right, or anything of that sort. And with our plugin system, we can also look at a future where Gatsby functions can run on any infra, not just Gatsby Cloud. So it isn't even tied into one platform like that. While we think Gatsby Cloud is the fastest and the nicest way to, build and deploy and serve Gatsby sites, we don't limit you to it, because we think, you can make your best choices. So there's that. And with that, I think Gatsby functions is super powerful. We're really looking forward to seeing what people do with it. And those would be my, 3 favorite things about Gatsby.
So I can see Gatsby functions in beta, right?
Yes, you can. I think I wonder if it's a public beta yet, or is it a private beta? I think it's a public beta.
Yes, public beta.
In case it's not, let me know and I'm happy to. Oh yeah, there you go. It is public. So you can sign up right now and try it out. In case you can't, in case you don't have access, in case it's private, and if I'm forgetting, feel free to DM me on on Twitter or anywhere really, and I'll be happy to get you up and running. If you look at gatsbyjs.com/docs/how-to functions, you can see that it says functions beta, and functions are currently in beta. There you go. You can just enable it by adding one flag to your Gatsby config, and it'll just work, So try it out.
Good. So let's move. So before we move ahead and talk about Gatsby Cloud, let's take one question which Guru Raj has. So how web crawler works with Gatsby Features?
Good question. So one of the many good things about static site generators, and the reason why people have traditionally loved them, is SEO, right? And this is where web crawlers become relevant. In the past, crawlers, including Google, didn't render your JavaScript, right? They only, when they crawled your sites, they looked at all of the assets for your site, and they wouldn't run JavaScript. So if you had a client-side JavaScript website, which wouldn't work without JavaScript, right? Like if you just built a React site which had an empty index.html and we just loaded JavaScript and then rendered on the client, that stuff wouldn't be picked up by crawlers in the past, and your site would suffer, as a result in terms of SEO. That's not the case anymore. Google now crawls your JavaScript and runs your JavaScript. So that's changed. But as far as I know, not all search engines do that yet, right? That's one of the biggest reasons why static sites are great for SEO, because while you have those rich client-side JavaScript experiences, you still want crawlers to be able to understand your site when they look at just the HTML. And to answer Guru Raj's question, how do web crawlers work with Gatsby? Like any other static site, your Gatsby site, when it's built, is just a bunch of HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And your Gatsby site will work without that JavaScript. If you disable JavaScript in your browser and hit refresh, you would still get that HTML and that CSS. And crawlers that don't understand JavaScript, that's what they'd see. So that's how they'd work. They'd actually they'd work great. And that's why Gatsby sites typically have great SEO out of the box, right? So you get performance, you get SEO, you get all of those benefits of static site generators.
Thanks for answering that. So let's move on to our next question, which is Gatsby Cloud. So tell us more about Gatsby Cloud. We have a bit of we can deploy it, but I know you have a lot more to share about it.
Sure. Okay. Gatsby Cloud started off as a CI platform, right? The idea was that you'd want to build your Gatsby site, and you could build it on Netlify and Vercel and all of these other great platforms. But we wanted to build a platform that had a first-class Gatsby experience, right? Where building a Gatsby site was as fast as it could be. And that's what we built Gatsby Cloud for to begin with, right? Today, if you try building a Gatsby site of really any size, it'll likely build the fastest on Gatsby Cloud. Along with that, we then launched incremental builds. Ink builds was the idea with ink builds is that with a lot of static site generators, one of the things that you end up hitting is that after a certain inflection point, the number of pages in your site, you start seeing a real slowdown with build times, right? Like your site takes ages to build, and that becomes a bottleneck. With incremental builds, the idea is that every time you make a change, we're only going to rebuild the pages that would be affected by that data change, right? So for instance, if you use certain data and certain queries, and those queries exist in certain pages, because we own the data engine and because we own that whole GraphQL subsystem, we're able to go back and intelligently mark out what queries include what data, and therefore what pages need to be invalidated. So with ink builds, what we launched was the ability to only rebuild those pages. Now that stuff has proved to be a huge success, because we've had sites that will take many minutes, like 20-30 minutes to build for the initial build, but then every change, if it's just for a single page, can build under 10 seconds, right? And that's been a game changer for just productivity and just that workflow in general. Now eventually we then open sourced incremental builds, and that's part of Gatsby open source. You can do all of that stuff in Gatsby open source, so you can do it on any platform. But we still have stuff like with Gatsby open source, we have the idea of jobs, which you can use workers for. Gatsby Cloud has these workers for image transformation and image generation, right? So if you try to build a site with, another bottleneck for static sites is that when you have sites with a lot of images, especially Gatsby sites, because we generate all these different versions, you can see that if you have 1,000 images, we're now generating like 8,000 images on every build, right? And that time really adds up. That ends up taking a lot of time. With Gatsby Cloud, we have infinite workers that we'll spin up for all of these versions of your images, right? So instead of taking many minutes, it now takes seconds, because we're now running image generation in parallel across the board. So we do stuff like that. There's a lot of other optimizations that we do from scratch, including keeping cache around and so on, that really make Gatsby Cloud unique in terms of building Gatsby sites. It's easily the fastest place for building your sites. Now there's that aspect of Gatsby Cloud, and with that, we've for the longest time had the ability to deploy to many different hosts, right? Even today, you can deploy it Fastly, AWS S3, Netlify, Vercel Cloud, and so on. And all of these are great. They're great platforms with fantastic reliability. Most of them are, world-class CDNs. Yeah. But we found that often with deploying to a lot of these, platforms, deployment would take so long because you'd still have to translate everything from one system and send it over to somebody else. That often we'd see Gatsby sites building in less than 10 seconds, but then taking over a minute to deploy to Netlify, for example. And that's when we decided to build in Gatsby hosting, which is sort of hosting included in the Gatsby Cloud product. So it's not just CI anymore. You can build your sites, but you can also just host it there. So there's one more thing that you don't need to worry about anymore. You can add your custom domain, and really with like 2 clicks, you now have hosting on a world-class CDN. Now this CDN is powered by Fastly. Fastly has over, I think 55 off the top of my head, regions globally. When you sign up for Gatsby hosting, by default, your site is served across North America and Europe, so you create global coverage in that sense. And it deploys typically a lot faster than most other hosting integrations on Gatsby Cloud because, again, we control that pipeline, right? We run your build, we only deploy, what we need to, even if, different versions of your build has included a file that looks like let's say you run a build today, and let's say you have a page that has hello world, right? And you change world to hello universe, and let's say you change it back to world, right? And the time you change it back to world, because we've already had that page which said hello world, we won't really re-upload that. We know that, hey, that's the same MD5 hash, that's the same file. We don't need to do that work again. So we have smart optimizations of that sort here as well. And because of that, and because of these things that we build in, deploying is also much faster now. So there's that aspect. And finally, now there's functions. Functions is again part of Gatsby Cloud. You have hosting, you have building phase sites, you have functions. These functions are built on Gatsby Cloud, they're deployed on Gatsby Cloud. You don't have to worry about any of the infrastructure stuff, just works. There's also many other things that we offer, including Lighthouse scores. Every time you build your Gatsby site, you can see your scores for that build, compare it. So that gives you a good way to sort of track the performance of your site and how you're doing as you keep building it. We also have Gatsby Preview. Gatsby Preview is, the idea with Gatsby Preview is that with a lot of these static site generators and their workflows, one thing that we've sort of kind of broken has been the CMS preview experience, right? For instance, on WordPress, when you're editing stuff, you can see what it will look like. You can preview it. And that's super important, right? It might not seem important to like us developers, but for folks who write content, that's a really large priority, right? So we built Gatsby Preview, which is a way to preview your site as you make changes. And you can get a previewable URL that you can sort of share with people. Like, so if you're writing content and if you have other stakeholders in your for your website, you can just share a link with them, and as you update content, that page keeps getting updated. We're now working on the next generation of Gatsby Preview, and what that would look like. We're making it much more, much faster, more reliable, etc. as well. So that's the Gatsby Cloud also includes that. And there's more to come over time. We're looking for ways to build really the best experiences to build these rich web experiences. So yeah, I mean, if you're building Gatsby sites, Gatsby Cloud is a natural sort of home for your site.
And what about pricing? Is it free for open source or?
Good question. Not just open source. I mean, even if your site's closed source, you get a free tier that you can, you can sign up with. And there's a ton you can do on the free tier. Take a look at gatsbyjs.com. I think, pretty sure there's a whole page dedicated to it. I mean, I would guess it's @/pricing, but I could be wrong. Let me check. Oh yeah, it is. It is gatsbyjs.com/pricing. So, if you take a look, we have a variety of plans, including, performance and enterprise and whatnot. But even if you don't need any of that, even if you just want to, build your own sites, whether that's open source, whether that's closed source, I mean, it doesn't matter. We don't care. You can get up to 100 gigs of bandwidth for your site that you can serve with SSL with your custom domain. You can serve all of that on Gatsby Cloud for free. And we see new folks signing up all the time. You don't have to pay a penny. You get free hosting and really, really solid hosting. And the moment you see that your usage then demands more, you can talk to us. You can upgrade your plan, but you might not even need to. For really small, for small, not small, for averagely sized projects, you might not need to. You might be able to just stick with free, and it might just work for you. So try it out, check it out, and yeah, hit us up if you have questions. Go for it.
So in case you have any questions, please reach out to Siddharth. I think his Twitter handle is here in background, so you can always ping him and ask more questions. So
DMs are open.
On. DMs are open. That's important. Yeah. So let's move to the next question for the day. So it's like about the roadmap. So what's that? What's more? What's Gatsby has been working?
Good question. In terms of what we've been working on recently, it's been functions. I mean, we've put in a lot of our time over the past few weeks and months working on Gatsby functions, both in open source as well as Gatsby Cloud. Currently, Gatsby functions, as you saw, is still in beta. So we're looking forward to building what isn't beta, what is the absolute stable final sort of version of it. But besides that, what we're also working on every day is listening to what folks have to say and improving things as we go. We're looking at improving deploy times. We've seen that deploying typically sometimes still takes longer than we'd like. We're looking at improving build times. We have a squad dedicated to the open source framework that's constantly working on improving how fast Gatsby is and how capable it is. You can take a look at everything we're doing on GitHub for Gatsby open source. Besides, we're doing everything we can to make building your sites an absolute breeze. And in terms of what I can share right now, functions is really the center of that today.
Yeah, so I think we don't have any question. So Raghavan had the same question, what about deployment? So I already answered those. Yeah, this looks interesting. I'm sure that many want to actually know the answer. Gatsby. Why is the name Gatsby?
You should ask Kyle. Kyle Matthews, one of our founders. Kyle's fantastic. He's on Twitter. He named it. I will not answer this on his behalf. Instead, I will say, tag Kyle on Twitter. Ask him why he named it Gatsby. He will tell you. There is a story behind it, but he will tell you the story. And I don't want to take that away from him.
Oh, that's good. So Raghavan, I think now you know where to ask this question. So that's it for the day.
Kyle A. Matthews. You'll find him.
Yeah.
Just search.
I follow him. So
yeah, ask him.
Great. So let's move on to the last question for you. So is there anything you want to promote at the channel?
GatsbyJS.com. Go sign up. Take a look. If you haven't used it, try it out. If you don't like it, tell us. If you like it, tell us. If you don't care, tell us. Whatever you feel, tell us, and we're always happy to listen and get feedback. Besides GatsbyJS.com, I'm currently also writing a book. It's called Web Development for Everyone. You can check it out at webdevelopmentforeveryone.com. The idea of the book is that web development is hard, and there's a lot to it, right? There's a lot of different aspects to it, and I want to simplify that and build a resource that lets people get started and covers everything from Git and HTML, CSS, and React, and so on. So if you're interested, sign up at webdevelopment.com. webdevelopmentforeveryone.com. It's a long name, but sign up. And I'm also working on that. Generally, you can find me on Twitter if you have anything else that you'd like to talk about. That's it. And also subscribe on this YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, follow the little, the bell icon. you know,
That's so nice.
go set the bell icon to all so you get all the notifications. Santosh is great. Follow him on Twitter.
I think that's more than enough. Thanks a lot, Siddharth. So yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think we are done. We don't have any questions, but yeah, in closing notes, we will meet again next week. So next week we are going to talk about Stencil, and one of the great developer I know from Twitter. So he has been working on something called Tech Go, which is like online platform to create slides. So in case you want to create your own online slides, I think it's really great. I think the great animation as well. So just go ahead and give it a try, and we will be talking about Stencil.js next week. And that's it for the day. But apart from that, just the current situations in India. So please take care of yourself, as your family and your friends as well. I'm sure there will be probably many of your friends who are working from your own city. So go ahead and help them if you can. That's it. That's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, stay
Is it
safe.
anything?
Don't get out of the house. Stay inside, and get your vaccine as soon as you can get it. It's a really, really, really scary time, and I think the best we can do is to just stay indoors right now. So stay indoors, wear a mask if you have to get out, and get your vaccine as soon as you can.
So be safe and see you next week, everyone. Bye bye. That's it.